You can support In the Past Lane with as little as $1 a month. Just go to the support page at our website, inthepastlane.com. Thanks.
We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect
huddled
union,
masses yearning to breathe
Consider
free.
that we shall be as a city upon a hill.
that all men and women are created equal.
Give me liberty or give me death.
Nobody's free until everybody's free.
And the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
Hi there. Welcome to In the Past Lane, the podcast about American history and why it matters. Brought to you by SBI, Snoring Beagle International, and coming to you from the Shamrock Studios, located in central Massachusetts. I'm your host, historian at large, Edward T. O'Donnell, and this is episode 185. Every week here at In the Past Lane, I bring you the key events and birthdays of notable people that took place this week in U.S. history, with special attention to one important story. So what's happening in the Past Lane this week? Well, coronavirus is what's happening. But you don't need me to tell you that. This week, the college where I work, Holy Cross, became one of hundreds of colleges and universities to send their students home and switch all courses to online formats. As you can imagine, this has been a huge blow to the students, especially seniors, who were looking forward to their last few months of college and college-related fun. This coming week, professors will be working to convert their classes to some combination of online formats, including video-recorded lectures and live discussions via Google Meet. Some of you may remember that back in January, I told you that this semester my students would be making podcast episodes. Well, that assignment needs to be ditched, since students won't have access to recording equipment. This whole thing is going to be one big adventure, to say the least. And I'll keep you posted on how it goes. Also, if you want to learn more about the history of the greatest pandemic in modern U.S. history, the flu pandemic of 1918-1919, check out In the Past Lane, episode 105, where I talked to historian Nancy Bristow about her book, American Pandemic: The Lost Worlds of the 1918 Influenza Pandemic. All right, let's get on with it. Here's what happened in American history this week. Let's start with this. On March 17, 1888, 132 years ago this week, the mayor of New York City made a huge mistake. It was St. Patrick's Day, and yet Mayor Abram Hewitt made good on his recent pledge to not review the annual St. Patrick's Day parade and to not fly the Irish flag over City Hall. The mayor framed his decision as a stand for pure, enlightened political leadership that was above pandering to what he considered petty special interests. But the city's enormous Irish population did not see it that way, and Hewitt would soon learn a painful lesson in late 19th century urban politics. Abram Hewitt was a wealthy industrialist and former congressman who had won election as mayor of New York in 1886. Although a member of the elite silk stocking set, he ran as the candidate of Tammany Hall, the legendary political organization that drew its power from the city's immigrant masses, especially the Irish. Tammany officials had selected him out of panic, because the election of 1886 had featured a stunning challenge by an upstart Labor Party that had selected as its candidate the reformer Henry George, a man immensely popular with the city's laboring masses. Just as Tammany had hoped, Hewitt's respectable image helped him garner just enough votes to narrowly defeat George. Although he was elected on a Tammany Hall ticket, and to a large degree by the Irish vote, Hewitt was a blue blood who abhorred the idea of ethnic politics. Unfortunately for him, he lacked the political good sense to keep this disdain to himself. So, when a delegation of representatives of Irish organizations came calling on March 6th, he did little to conceal his contempt. This delegation had come in response to rumors that Hewitt would not review the upcoming St. Patrick's Day parade. The majority of Irishmen vote the Democratic ticket, they reminded him, and your vote largely came from Irishmen, a considerable portion of whom belong to the societies who will parade on St. Patrick's Day. Well, Hewitt was clearly irked by their suggestion that he owed the Irish an appearance at the parade. He snapped back, "Now let us understand each other. I am mayor of this city. You ask me to leave my duties and review your parade?" At that moment, he was interrupted by one of the delegation. "But, Mr. Mayor, St. Patrick's Day is a holiday." "It is not a legal holiday," continued the mayor testily. "You ask me to leave my duties and review your parade, and you speak of the vote cast by the Irish in your societies for the Democratic candidates? I may be a candidate for mayor or for president next fall, and may want all the votes I can get. But for the purpose of getting this Irish vote, I will not come down to the level of reviewing any parade because of the nationality represented. I will review no parades, whether Irish, German, or Italian, as a Democrat. I will review parades only as mayor of the whole city and irrespective of party considerations." A few minutes later, the delegation of Irishmen left the meeting angry and empty-handed. When word of the mayor's refusal to review the parade hit the papers, the city's huge Irish population reacted angrily. The tradition of having the mayor review the St. Patrick's Day parade had begun nearly 4 decades earlier, and since that time no mayor had ever refused the honor. Several critics pointed out that Hewitt actually had reviewed an ethnic parade a year earlier, when Italian societies marched in commemoration of Garibaldi's defense of Rome. To the city's Irish, the mayor's decision was an insult that reflected elite New York's low opinion of them. The mayor's refusal to review the parade immediately called into question a second long-standing tradition in Manhattan, the flying of the Irish flag over City Hall on March 17th. In anticipation of a fight, an Irish-American alderman named Patrick Diver authored a resolution calling for the Irish flag to be flown over City Hall on March 17th, and it passed unanimously. A second resolution, clearly intended to force the mayor's hand, was also passed, calling for the American flag to be flown at half-staff on March 16th in honor of Kaiser Wilhelm I of Germany, who had just died. Well, Hewitt tried his best to navigate the political minefield before him, keenly aware of the importance of both the Irish and the German vote. He ordered the American flag flown at half-staff on March 16th as an expression of sympathy for the Kaiser, and the following day, he ordered it raised to full staff in honor of Ireland. But no Irish flag was raised. Mentions of Hewitt's name at the parade that day drew catcalls and hisses from the crowd. That evening, Hewitt tried to mend fences with the Irish by attending the annual dinner of the Friendly Sons of St. Patrick, and he delivered a short address in which he said, "The day will come when you will see the flag of Ireland floating where it ought to float, over a free nation in a free Ireland." It was a nice gesture in support of Irish nationhood, but it did very little to appease the city's Irish population. And besides, Hewitt returned to his original form a few days later, when the Board of Aldermen passed a law granting them the power to decide what flag would fly over City Hall on any given day. Hewitt vetoed the bill and issued a scathing rebuke to the Irishmen on the board who were behind it. He noted that while the Irish made up 16% of the city's population, they constituted an unnaturally high 27% of the Board of Aldermen and 28% of the police department. Even worse, continued the mayor, the Irish contributed an even greater percentage to the city's prison and asylum populations. Apparently, in the eyes of the mayor, Ireland hadn't sent its best. The facts above stated, when properly considered, concluded the mayor, should impose a modest restraint on the Irish in claiming any new privileges. The board responded by promptly passing the measure over Hewitt's veto. Well, mayors in those days only served 2-year terms, so Hewitt faced re-election that fall. Tammany Hall, recognizing that Hewitt threatened to erode their Irish voter base, withdrew its support from him and nominated an Irish-born candidate named Hugh Grant. Hewitt, nonetheless, managed to secure the nomination of several Democratic and independent political organizations. The Irish turned out in droves on Election Day and sent Hewitt to a third-place finish behind Grant and the Republican candidate. The St. Patrick's Day affair of 1888 established an absolute rule for New York City politics, and pretty much politics in any large city. Politicians who insulted the city's largest ethnic groups did so at their peril. The dominant ethnic and racial groups in New York City have changed in the years since 1888 to include Jews, Italians, Puerto Ricans, Asians, and African Americans, but the rule remains the same. And here's a fun fact. While New York City's St. Patrick's Day parade is huge and gets lots of attention, it's no longer the city's largest ethnic parade. That honor goes to the annual West Indian Day Parade that honors people from places like Jamaica, Grenada, and Trinidad. And you better believe the mayor never misses it. So what else of note happened this week in U.S. history? March 16th, 1968, U.S. Army soldiers slaughtered more than 500 unarmed Vietnamese civilians in the village of My Lai. The massacre was covered up, but eventually it became public knowledge 20 months later in November 1969. 26 soldiers were charged with crimes, but only Lieutenant William Calley Jr. was convicted. He was found guilty of killing 22 people and received a life sentence. But he only served 3.5 years under house arrest. Lieutenant Calley is still alive and living in Florida at the age of 76. March 17, 1762, the first St. Patrick's Day parade took place in New York City. Actually, it wasn't much of a parade, more of a procession. It occurred when an Irishman named John Marshall held a St. Patrick's Day dinner at his house. Apparently, his guests marched to the event as a group, thus forming an unofficial parade. The first recorded true parade took place 4 years later in 1766, also in New York City, when local military units, including some Irish soldiers serving in the British Army, marched from house to house of the leading Irish citizens of the city. And here's a fun fact. Ireland didn't start holding St. Patrick's Day parades until the 20th century, several hundred years after they began in America. March 17, 1937, aviator Amelia Earhart began her attempt at a round-the-world flight. She took off that day from Oakland, California, and headed west out over the Pacific. Earhart had earned international fame 5 years earlier in 1932 when she became the first female aviator to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean. But this flight would end in tragedy and mystery. The last radio contact she made was on July 2nd, and after that she vanished without a trace. And here's a St. Patrick's Day-related fun fact. Her two aviators were Irish Americans, named Fred Noonan and Harry Manning. Noonan was aboard the plane when it disappeared. Other important events this week. March 16, 1802, the U.S. Military Academy at West Point was established. March 16, 1850, Nathaniel Hawthorne published The Scarlet Letter. And 2 years later, on March 20th, 1852, Harriet Beecher Stowe published Uncle Tom's Cabin. And what notable people were born this week in American history? Well, 2 U.S. presidents. March 16, 1751, the fourth President of the United States, James Madison, was born in Port Conway, Virginia. Madison is known as the father of the U.S. Constitution for the key role that he played at the Constitutional Convention. And he later drafted the Bill of Rights, which became the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Madison's other claim to fame is that he is the shortest man ever to be president at 5'4". March 18, 1837, the 22nd and 24th President of the United States, Grover Cleveland, was born in Caldwell, New Jersey. Cleveland was a lawyer and a career politician who ascended from serving as mayor of Buffalo, New York, to governor of New York State, and then to President of the United States in 1884. He lost re-election in 1888 to Benjamin Harrison, but then won a second term in 1892. And here are 2 fun facts about President Cleveland. First, his real first name was Stephen, not Grover. And second, he was a distant relative of the guy for whom the city of Cleveland was named. March 17, 1777, Supreme Court Justice Roger B. Taney was born in Calvert County, Maryland. Interestingly, for a guy born on St. Patrick's Day, Taney was a descendant of Irish immigrants. And he was named to the Supreme Court by another Irish American, President Andrew Jackson, in 1836. 21 years later, Taney issued the decision for which he is most famous, or rather infamous, Dred Scott versus Sanford, in which he argued that African Americans, even those who were free, could never be U.S. citizens and thus had no political or legal rights. In recent years, the movement to remove Confederate memorials has also led to the removal of statues of pro-slavery individuals like Justice Taney. Other important birthdays this week: March 16, 1912, First Lady of the United States, Pat Nixon. March 17, 1912, civil rights activist Bayard Rustin. And March 18, 1860, populist politician and 4-time presidential candidate, William Jennings Bryan. Okay, time for the last word. Let's give it to Amelia Earhart, who 83 years ago this week took off on her last flight, an ill-fated attempt to fly around the world. Here's a passage from a letter she wrote to her husband the night before taking off. Please know that I am aware of the hazards. I want to do it because I want to do it. Women must try things as men have tried. When they fail, their failure must be a challenge to others. Well, that's going to do it for In the Past Lane this week. You can learn more about me and everything we talked about at inthepastlane.com. And let's interact via social media. I'm at In the Past Lane on both Twitter and Instagram, and our Facebook page is In the Past Lane Podcast. See you next week.
SBI, Snoring Beagle International.